Late-night television has always thrived on laughter, on the comfort of rehearsed jokes, lighthearted banter, and a sense of safety for both the host and the guest. But on one particular night, that fragile balance shattered. Scarlett Johansson, one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, walked onto the Tonight Show stage, expecting the usual routine. A quick chat about her latest project, a few jokes, a funny story, and then a goodbye to applause. Instead, what unfolded became one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night history. And it happened live. The evening started with energy. The audience clapped as Scarlett waved, her trademark smile lighting up the room. Fallon, always eager to entertain, leaned into his familiar rhythm. The jokes came quickly. The laughter filled the studio, and for a moment it seemed like any other Tonight Show segment. But then, with one comment, everything changed. Fallon leaned forward, his grin still fixed in place, but the tone of his words cut through the warmth of the stage. He said almost casually, "Come on, Scarlett. People say you're not exactly playing fair in Hollywood, that you've, pulled strings to get your way." The studio laughed, but not comfortably. It was the kind of laugh that comes when people aren't sure if it's a joke or not. The air shifted, and Scarlett felt it. Her smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw set. She looked at Fallon with an intensity that silenced even the nervous chuckles. "Excuse me?" she said sharply. "That's completely out of line." The audience froze. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't part of the routine. Fallon tried to recover, chuckling awkwardly, waving it off like a clumsy gag. Hey, I'm just kidding. Relax." But Scarlett didn't budge. She leaned forward, her voice firm, unwavering. "No, that's not funny. Not here. Not like this." What followed was silence. A silence that hung heavy over the studio, broken only by the sound of shifting in seats and a few nervous coughs. The cameras stayed fixed, capturing every second. Fallon's grin faltered. For the first time that night, the king of late-night television looked powerless. And then it happened. Johansson pushed her chair back, stood up, and turned to the audience. "Thank you," she muttered softly, but firmly. With that, she walked off stage. The audience gasped, unsure if they were watching a real walk-off or some elaborate stunt. But there was no punchline, no skit waiting to unfold. Scarlett Johansson had just walked out of one of the most controlled environments in American entertainment, and she had done it live. The clip was online within minutes. Twitter exploded. TikTok edits replayed the moment in slow motion. Some defended Fallon, calling it harmless comedy. Others rallied behind Scarlett, praising her for refusing to laugh off a public insult. News outlets scrambled to cover it, headlines flashing words like walk-off, confrontation, and controversy. But what made this moment so explosive wasn't just Scarlett's reaction. It was what lay beneath it. For years, Fallon's charm had been treated as untouchable. For years, Johansson had been forced to defend herself in an industry that often questioned her every move. That night, in front of millions, the two narratives collided. As Johansson disappeared behind the curtain, Fallon remained under the lights. His smile faded, replaced by something far less certain. He shuffled his cards, cracked a weak joke, and tried to move on. But everyone watching knew they had witnessed something real. Something raw. And it raised a question that no amount of applause could cover up. Was this just a joke gone wrong? Or had Jimmy Fallon revealed something deeper? Because while Scarlett Johansson left the stage that night, Jimmy Fallon was left exposed. And the fallout had only just begun. For more than a decade, Jimmy Fallon was seen as the golden boy of late-night television. He was the safe choice, the charming host who could make anyone laugh. His laugh was infectious. His impressions became viral sensations. and celebrities lined up to sit across from him. To many viewers, Fallon represented comfort, a light escape from the chaos of the world. But behind that image, cracks had already started to show. Whispers had circulated for years. Former staffers spoke of chaos behind the scenes. Reports described a workplace culture that wasn't always the fun-loving environment Fallon projected on camera. Some remembered unpredictable moods. Others hinted at an atmosphere where people were constantly on edge. When Rolling Stone published its bombshell expose in 2023, the world saw a different picture, one of erratic behavior, drunken episodes, and a revolving door of employees who said they were burned out and mistreated. Suddenly, the smiling host didn't seem so untouchable anymore. Fallon's public image began to wobble. For every clip of him laughing with a movie star, there were comments online calling him fake nice. For every impression that went viral, there were threads on Reddit and Twitter accusing him of being insincere. And then there was his history with controversial moments, interviews that landed poorly, jokes that fell flat, and the infamous ruffling of Donald Trump's hair in 2016, a move that critics said humanized a man many viewed as dangerous. Fallon had apologized, but the damage lingered. So when Scarlett Johansson challenged him live, when she stood her ground instead of playing along, it struck a nerve. People weren't just reacting to one awkward moment. They were connecting it to years of questions about Fallon himself. Was he really the nice guy he pretended to be, or was the mask finally slipping? As clips spread across social media, the debate ignited. Some insisted Fallon was harmless, that he had only been joking. But others pointed to the exposes, the rumors, the controversies, and said this was part of a pattern, a host who crossed lines and hid behind laughter. And the fact that Johansson, a star with her own history of fighting back against powerful forces, had called him out live made it impossible to ignore. The night had already shifted Fallon's reputation. What should have been another predictable late-night segment became something else entirely. Evidence, for some, that Fallon's charm was nothing more than a polished act. And as the backlash built, one question lingered louder than all the rest. How much longer could Jimmy Fallon keep up the performance before the cracks consumed him completely? Scarlett Johansson has never been the kind of star to sit quietly and accept what others decide for her. From the earliest days of her career, she was forced to fight against stereotypes, against the industry's attempts to reduce her to little more than a face and a body. Time and time again, she confronted interviewers who asked her about diets, fashion, or personal relationships while ignoring the craft of her work. On red carpets, she pushed back with sharp wit, reminding journalists that she was more than the shallow questions they threw at her. Those moments became viral in the road, evidence of a woman refusing to play the submissive Hollywood game. Her battles didn't stop with the media. When Disney attempted to quietly undercut her with the release of Black Widow on streaming platforms, Johansson didn't stay silent. She sued one of the most powerful corporations in the world, demanding accountability and fairness in how her work, and the work of so many others, was treated. Many in the industry were stunned. Few dared to challenge Disney publicly, but Johansson did. And she won. The case was settled, and her boldness sent a clear message. She would not allow even the most powerful players in Hollywood to take advantage of her. That fighting spirit is what made Fallon's remark so striking. When he implied, even jokingly, that she had pulled strings or manipulated her way through Hollywood, it wasn't just an offhand joke. It touched a nerve that had been hit many times before. Johansson had built a career out of resisting that narrative, of demanding to be seen for her talent, her decisions, and her control over her own path. To laugh off Fallon's words would have been to undermine years of work she had put into shifting how women in Hollywood were treated, and the audience knew it. Those who followed her career recognized the look on her face, the fire in her tone. It wasn't simply anger. It was defiance. It was the same defiance she showed when she stood up to Disney, when she shut down condescending questions, when she carved out space for herself in an industry that often tried to close its doors on women who refused to conform to God. So when she walked out that night, it wasn't a collapse. It was a continuation. Another chapter in a story where Scarlett Johansson refused to be silent, refused to be complicit, and refused to let powerful men frame her story for her. For her fans, it was proof of who she had always been. For Fallon, it was something far more dangerous, because now he wasn't facing just another awkward moment. He was standing against a woman whose entire career had been built on standing her ground, and that meant the incident wasn't going to disappear quietly. It was only going to grow. For days, speculation swirled about what exactly had happened. In that studio, the short clips circulating online showed only fragments. Scarlett's sudden shift in expression, the crowd's nervous laughter, Fallon's attempt to play it off, and then her exit. But when the full footage surfaced, there was no mistaking the spark that set it all ablaze. It was the accusation itself. Fallon, with a smirk that he likely believed was harmless, suggested that Johansson had used her influence to manipulate deals in Hollywood. He implied that her success wasn't just talent and persistence, but backroom. Strings pulled in her favor. To some, it sounded like a clumsy attempt at humor. To others, it was a thinly veiled insult that cast doubt on a woman who had fought her entire career to be taken seriously. The studio audience's reaction said, everything. At first, a few scattered laughs, then the uneasy murmurs, and finally, silence, as people realized they had just witnessed a line being crossed. Johansson didn't hesitate. Her response was sharp, her voice cutting through the awkwardness. Excuse me? That's completely out of line. No one in that room doubted she meant it. Fallon's laugh came next, high-pitched, forced, the sound of a man realizing too late that he had misjudged the moment. Hey, I'm just kidding, he said, but the words only deepened the divide. Johansson wasn't playing along. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him, her voice low but unshaken. No, that's not funny. Not here. Not like this. And then she was gone. The internet turned that moment into a wildfire. Within hours, hashtags spread across Twitter. Team Scarlett and Fallon out. TikTok edits replayed the exchange in slow motion, captions dissecting every glance and pause. News outlets clipped the segment and built headlines around the confrontation. Fallon's camp rushed to spin it as a misunderstanding, insisting it was comedy that hadn't landed. Johansson's team released a statement just as sharp as her. On-air response, making it clear she wouldn't be brushed off with the excuse of a bad joke. The split was immediate. Fans of Fallon defended him, insisting he was being playful. Critics saw the incident as part of a larger pattern, a host too comfortable making others the butt of his jokes, and too careless to notice when the joke went too far. For Johansson, the moment was both a risk and a revelation. Risk, because storming off live television could have backfired. Revelation, because instead it became proof of her unwillingness to be diminished, even on one of the most powerful stages in entertainment. Accusation itself faded into the background, compared to the image of her walking away, unshaken, refusing to be part of the act. Fallon's attempt at humor had turned into a cultural flashpoint, and the fallout was only beginning. The internet did what it always does. It took a single moment, a few seconds of television, and magnified it into a cultural battleground. By the next morning, the clip of Scarlett Johansson walking off Fallon's stage had been viewed millions of times. The reactions were split down the middle. Some said Fallon had simply made a bad joke, that Johansson had overreacted. Others insisted she was right to stand her ground, that Fallon had revealed something ugly in the way he framed his words. Media became the arena. On Twitter, hashtags trended side by side. Hashtag Team Scarlett from those applauding her courage, and hashtag Fallon out from critics who believed his time as the face of late-night comedy had passed. TikTok users slowed the clip, down frame by frame, analyzing Johansson's tone, Fallon's smirk, the crowd's unease. On Instagram, side-by-side comparisons appeared. Fallon laughing with male guests who joked freely, versus Johansson shutting him down when the humor turned on her. News outlets seized the moment. Op-eds poured in. Some called it another example of women in Hollywood being forced to defend their reputations on live television. Others argued it showed the fragility of late-night comedy in an era where audiences no longer tolerate certain lines being crossed. Sponsors of the show reportedly began asking questions behind the scenes. Networks don't like uncertainty, and Fallon's unpredictability was suddenly under the microscope. Meanwhile, Scarlett's stance only seemed to strengthen her. Articles praised her refusal to go along with the joke. Fans flooded her social media with messages of support. Her walk-off became a symbol not of scandal, but of defiance. She wasn't painted as difficult or ungrateful. She was celebrated. As a woman who refused to be humiliated for the sake of entertainment. For Fallon, though, the night wouldn't fade so easily. The backlash revived older criticisms, the exposes about his workplace, the infamous Trump moment, the reputation of a man who smiled on camera but carried a darker narrative off it. What had been intended as a playful jab now stood as another brick in the wall of doubt surrounding him. The Tonight Show, once a safe haven of lighthearted comedy, was suddenly a battlefield of public opinion. Every second of that interview was being picked apart, every word scrutinized. And the question looming over it all was simple. In a world that no longer accepts dismissive humor as harmless, could Jimmy Fallon survive the storm he had just created? In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle, but the echoes of that night didn't fade. Scarlett Johansson, far from being weakened by the controversy, emerged stronger than ever. Her career showed no cracks. If anything, the moment only added to her image as a woman unwilling to be diminished. She walked red carpets with the same unshakable confidence, posed for cameras without a trace of hesitation, and spoke about her projects without once needing to revisit Fallon's words. For her fans, the silence on the subject was loud. It said everything they needed to hear. She had moved on, and she had done so without compromise. For Fallon, the story was different. He addressed the incident with the same tools he always used, laughter and apologies. In a later monologue, he brushed it off as a misunderstanding, another case of humor not landing as intended, but the damage was harder to hide. Viewers replayed the clip over and over, comparing his attempts at charm with the reality of how it had landed. To many, his explanation sounded less like accountability and more like excuse. Behind the scenes, networks and sponsors watched closely. Late-night television depends on trust, on the illusion that the host is both harmless and entertaining. When that illusion cracks, it becomes difficult to repair. Reports hinted at nervous conversations among executives. Fallon had weathered storms before, the Trump hair ruffle, the Rolling Stone expose, but this one cut deeper because it unfolded live and unedited. There was no script to hide behind, no clever editing to soften the blow. The cultural verdict became clearer with time. Johansson's star continued to rise. She was praised in think pieces, celebrated in interviews, and admired for walking away rather than playing into a moment meant to diminish her. Fallon, meanwhile, was left carrying the weight of a question that refused to leave him. Was the nice guy of late night really who he seemed, or had Scarlett's defiance revealed something more? In the end, that night wasn't just another late night mishap. It became a symbol of the fragility of reputations, of the power of refusing to be complicit. and of the shifting boundaries of what audiences will tolerate. Johansson's walk-off wasn't a breakdown. It was a declaration. And Fallon's attempt at humor became a cautionary tale about the cost of crossing a line in front of millions. Because while Scarlett walked away without looking back, Fallon was left sitting under the lights, forced to face what everyone else had already decided. In the court of public opinion, she had won. He had not. Time passed, but the confrontation lingered like an unshakable echo in the entertainment world. Months later, Scarlett's walk-off was still dissected in podcasts, late-night debates, and endless social media threads. It was no longer just about one interview. It had become a cultural touchstone, a line in the sand between an era of brushed-aside sexism and a new standard of accountability. Her defiance on live television wasn't remembered as an outburst, but as a moment of clarity, a refusal to let mockery stand unchallenged. For Fallon, recovery was far less clean. Ratings wavered. His once effortless charm seemed rehearsed, strained, as though every laugh hid the fear of misstepping again. Audiences noticed. What had been shrugged off in the past now carried heavier weight, as though the world was watching, with sharper eyes, waiting for the next crack to appear. His brand of comedy, once untouchable, now felt fragile, brittle against the memory of Scarlett's refusal. Meanwhile, Scarlett's silence became her loudest statement. She never addressed Fallon directly, never gave the scandal more oxygen than it already consumed. Instead, she poured her energy into projects that mattered to her, films that stretched boundaries, causes that reflected her principles, interviews where her words were deliberate and measured. That silence was power. It left the narrative in the hands of those who had seen the moment for what it was, a public rejection of belittlement. And slowly, a shift occurred. Other actors and actresses began to speak with a little more boldness, to resist the small humiliations that often came with press tours and late-night appearances. Fans began to expect more from hosts, more empathy, more respect, more humanity. In that sense, the confrontation had sparked something larger than itself. By the time award season arrived, the symbolism was undeniable. Scarlett stepped onto the stage in front of flashing cameras, head high, presence unshaken. Applause thundered, not just for her performance in film, but for the role she had played in redefining the terms of celebrity power. Fallon, meanwhile, remained in his studio, his laugh track running as always, but with an audience that would never again hear him the same way.